these ideas that I've been discussing are, at least to me, the ideas that have certainly shaped my whole thinking, my continual probing. Now, there may be many other ideas that have shaped your lives. That's why I've called it Ideas That Shape Our Lives, because these can really have such an effect on our lives and really transform our whole perspective on how we view each other, how we view ourselves, how we view what we think of as the world about us, because what you see is what you beget, as I said on the first morning. But I mentioned yesterday that as we get into this great idea of periodicity, of cycles, we obviously come into time. And time has many dimensions. Time is a human construct, as many physicists are recognizing. But there are a variety of times in which there is the dense container, the physical as the dense container, upadhi, which is a wonderful term because it's the nourisher, it's that which holds us together, sort of marks off the limits, you know. The body is marvelous in this respect. It in a way, it separates me from, of course, the chair and the table, and from other people and so on. And yet, it's porous, isn't it? And so it lets in as much as it shields and defines a certain limit, because it lets in the air and sun and warmth and all of that. So it's porous, it's true. And at this level, as I say, here is where really we begin to see the whole process of transmigration, but it's at this level that we have what we can call biological time. Which in many ways is different for every individual. We all have our own rhythms. We all have our own internal timepieces, don't we? And, you know, some people like to have breakfast at 6 o'clock in the morning. And it's rather difficult to wait until 7:15 when you're in a group and the meetings where the breakfast is 7:15. And for other people, good God, do I have to get up for breakfast at 7:15? I don't have breakfast until 10 o'clock. And so there's a biological rhythm. Sometimes we change them, and we're very flexible. So within this pattern of what I called then the psychic nature, there is psychological time. And if time permitted, I'd like to make a case that reincarnation takes place in psychological time. That is to say, what we normally think of as reincarnation and the after-death conditions and so on, that are really, to a large extent, in psychological time. But in this realm in which the psyche, if you want to do it this way, the psyche as both come among us, if that makes you feel more comfortable to call it that. But at that realm, as there is a movement, then we find mythic time. And this is the time of the once upon a time. This is what Mircea Eliade, the great scholar of comparative religions, history of religions, has called illud tempus, that time. All creation stories begin with the once upon a timeness. In the beginning. When is the beginning? It's any time and no time. in the Aboriginal traditions in Australia. There are these traditions of the song lines that must be sung, and everyone within the clan must have his part or her part in chanting the song lines, which sustains the creative process, sustains the universe. The Westerner, the European, we talk about the 40,000 years of the dream time. The dream time was not a phrase used by the Aborigine. It's the recreation in the moment. This time, that time, the great time, illud tempus. So it's the mythic time. And as the movement of the movement downwards into this, we'll talk a bit more about that tomorrow also, of what we refer to as the Buddhic realm and the association of Buddhimanas, Buddhi being this tremendous energy, which we'll touch upon a bit today. We come to mystic time. And then the awakening, which again, I'll talk a bit about, much more about tomorrow, but the awakening is, of course, no time. It's not the mystic time, but it is beyond time. Here is where language fails us. So it is that awakening, which then embraces the whole, which permits any time to be present, which permits all time to be. Time is irrelevant, if actually, in that. And so we begin to see the tremendous lawfulness in the third fundamental proposition. It's put that the cycle of incarnation or necessity, we talked about that, a cycle to which we are self-bound. We are self-binding creatures. We have been bound. We are on it. You know, you can't say, stop the world, I want to get off. We're on it. We're in the cycle. HPB calls this that cycle in which we now move on self-consciously, the burden of self-existence, the martyrdom of self-existence. The pilgrim, having struggled through and suffered in every form of life and being, is only at the bottom of the valley of matter. We bear it. That's what I'd like to conclude with tomorrow. But here she talks about in accordance with cyclic, and we've seen the cyclic, and karmic law. And we need then, I think, to look at this great principle, which we call karma. I think we can call it by many other names, as I will suggest as we go on. And I'm going to put karma here, because I think there's a progression, in a sense, that we need to look at, all of which is lawful. The universe is lawful through and through. It is orderly. There is a design. Often we speak of a plan. It's not something that's imposed, but something that unfolds. So there is an archetypal goal. Everything that we do begins to form in patterns, underlying patterns, if you like. This is the lawfulness. It is present. And I think that it moves from simply looking at karma as cause and effect, which I think is a very kind of mechanistic, reductionist sort of attitude towards it, and leads into a kind of determinism, which I think is absolutely contrary to the theosophical vision. When we're released from that, then we begin to see that while karma operates in all of this, for the human being, for each of us on this journey, that becomes dharma. That is to say, it becomes our unique way, and how each of us, again, the root is dri, to sustain, to nourish, how we sustain and nourish and further the whole process. And this is done through the law of harmonics, if you like. All of these, in one sense, are synonymous with karma. We sometimes separate karma and dharma. In our motto, it's been translated as religion, because it reunites us with the harmony of the whole. It's also been translated as duty. But when you release within karma, within the action, the dharmic possibilities, this is your unique occasion. It is your part, my part, our part, in maintaining the universe, in maintaining the whole system, in upholding it, in nourishing it, in giving it direction. And ultimately, out of that, what HPB calls the law of laws, which she calls compassion. So in that sense, karma is compassion. Karma is love. And she speaks of it as, in the voice of the silence, you remember towards the end, compassion is no attribute, not something one has. I have compassion. Nonsense. One may begin with that in a sense, but then one has separated oneself. I have compassion for you. I have separated myself from you. Compassion is no attribute, she says. It is the law of laws, Alaya's self. Alaya is that great fabric of the universe which responds, which is forever vibrating, forever moving in harmony, in a perfect harmonious mode. And its very nature, Alaya's self, its very nature is compassion, because it is in perfect harmony, but a harmony that is always inexact. You know, in one of the Mahatma letters, the statement is made, discord is the harmony of the universe. So discord, what is discord? It's the inexactness of the universe. A universe which is really permits all creativity. So this is always bringing about, and this is how we often speak of karma in terms of this bringing about this harmony, but always an inexactness, which is its own discord, never quite fitting, never a relationship that is exact. The gap of creativity, if you like, which is always present there. A little article that I came upon many years ago, which pointed out that the Greek ancient Pythagoras intuited a celestial harmony which he named the music of the spheres. And now modern genetic research has discovered musical genes. Genetic researcher Susumu Ono was struck by the flowing, repetitious nature of all genes in all creatures and decided to convert chemical formulas for living cells into musical notes. He discovered that genes carry a tune, not just random tones, but music structured very much like that of the Baroque and Romantic styles. Ono suggests that this genetic foundation offers a possible explanation for the origins of music. Certain melodies seem happy and others sad because we are genetically predisposed to hear them that way. Although genes are exceedingly complex chemically, they are composed of only 4 basic nucleic acids. To devise his musical gene system, Ono assigned 2 consecutive notes to each of the 4 chemicals, thereby making 1 octave of musical tones. His first composition was the mouse waltz, translated from a segment of mouse RNA. Ono says his work demonstrates the principle of periodicity, a theory which holds that the universe tends to move from chaos to order and back to chaos in certain common patterns. So the patterns that govern the movement of planets and galaxies also appear in genes and in music. But this is also present in every, not only in the genes, but therefore in every unit of matter through all of this. And there's, in the classical text of Kashmir Shaivism, which is one of the schools of Hindu philosophy, the one in which Dr. Taimni translated the Shiva Sutras. And another member in India who was equally magnificent and a deep philosopher and a professor, Dr. Jaideva Singh, translates it as the yoga of supreme identity. Dr. Taimni translates it as the ultimate reality and realization. There is a very brief sutra which introduces the second section of the work. It deals with this whole area, and it deals, therefore, not so much with time, but the phrase is Chittam Mantra. Now, Chittam, Chitta is thought, consciousness, that which ponders, it's consciousness which is focused through the cognizing instrument, or manas, if you like. It's that ability to cognize. And as Dr. Taimni puts it, all the different states of mind, all the different states of cognition, all the different states of consciousness focused through the thinking principle. Thoughts and ideas are essentially motions. Therefore, because karma is an action noun, karma is simply action. It's an action noun. To do, to perform, that's all it means, to perform. And what do we perform? We perform the music of our being, which is our dharma. And that discord, which it may produce, resolves itself into concord, brotherhood, compassion. And so, as Dr. Taimni puts it, harmonic or otherwise. Now, mantram, of course, is a term not easily defined, although it's used a great deal, and we talk about mantras, and the most famous, of course, is Om as the mantra. But mantra yoga is a tremendous system in which specific vibrations, even produced by meditation, can lead to a welling up of knowledge. So, Chittam Mantra. Mantra fundamentally, of course, it's the sound, the primary sound, the sound of nature, the sound of our being. One has this in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, that during the bardo state, one must hear the sound of the self as 1,000 thunders roaring. The sound, what is the sound that you are making as you walk through the world? What is this is directly related to us. Chittam Mantra. In those 2 words is the fact that all of consciousness reverberates, resounds. finds its own harmonic and therefore produces overtones, undertones, which we often call, in terms of karma, the consequences, the results, this and that, and so on, and make mechanistic. But all the time, this resounding. So what sound is each of us making? Discord is the harmony of the universe. So how do we bring this all together? Dr. Jaidev Singh puts it that it's that mental awareness by which one feels one's identity with the highest reality. Thus becoming identical with that reality, the mind itself becomes mantra. And he says further, the divine supreme I consciousness is the dynamo of all the mantras. And HPB, of course, refers to this in her esoteric instructions in the Collected Writings, Volume 12. I suggest if you want to read it, it's pages 516 to 520. And she discusses there the sacred syllable, Om. I'm coming back to karma, don't worry. And talking about the invocation, the Buddhist invocation, Om Mani Padme Hum. And in this she says, the most sacred of all Eastern formulas not only has every syllable a secret potency, producing a definite result, but the whole invocation has 7 different meanings and can produce 7 distinctive results. When rightly understood, this mystic statement contains a reference to the indissoluble union between man and the universe, rendered in 7 different ways, and having the capacity of 7 different applications to as many planes of thought and action. And it is said that if you pronounce that syllable in your own unique way, it will open all knowledge to you. You don't have to read any more books. You don't have to listen to any more talks. Isn't that wonderful? So, all knowledge, because all of the divine mind, all of the universal mind, all of universal consciousness is available to us. And that's what Chittam Mantra is saying. To sound that, the mind itself is music. The mind itself is resounding in harmony, in that wonderful harmony, in the harmonics. Harmony is not singing the same tone together, but singing each their own tone. That's what makes harmony, isn't it? Not singing the same. You know the story of Nasruddin, my favorite Sufi, who was given a violin on one occasion, and after some time, there are a couple of stories about it, but on one, he kept doing, and finally his friends said to him, you know, Nasruddin, there are other notes on the violin. And he said, yes, but when you've found the perfect note, why worry with the others? And of course, they advised him to take lessons, you know. So he went to a music teacher and asked what the cost of the lessons were. And the teacher said, well, it's $25 for the first lesson and $15 for every lesson thereafter. And he said, good, I'll start with the second lesson. So anyway, so this is indeed the whole differentiation, and HPB deals with this in The Secret Doctrine, in Volume 1, page 94, if you like, that the soul of the world, the whole presence of the world, is the voice, the feminine Vach, which precedes the word or logos, as she says, the definite and objective expression of that which has hitherto remained in the depths of concealed thought. The soul of the world is the melodious voice, the sound that constructs the entire universe. And this is really what we're talking about when we speak of karma, not as the principle of cause and effect that orchestrates the evolution of the individual, but rather the song. This is the performing. It's an action noun and refers to an enduring human capacity, the means or potentiality for carrying through action at every level of our being. To speak, to be, not just through the voice, but how you speak by your whole being. And so that leads us into the fact that it is forever creative. And karma is not only a capacity, it's a disposition, it's the way we carry on our lives at every moment, in thought, in feeling, and in action. It's a motivational tendency. It can even be said that we exercise our karma when we're tolerant, helpful, impatient, or scornful, jealous, or being very beautiful and kind and nice. Such dispositions are set up and developed through experience in which some particular motivational tendency is called forth, worked out, and attains a finality in any activity of body, speech, and mind, as the Buddhist scriptures say. In fact, in the Buddhist sutras, the term katakama, or which is sometimes translated as one who has done a deed, really means a practiced person. Skill in action. Skill in sounding your own note, which is your dharma. So that together we make the beautiful symphony that sustains the universe. This is our responsibility. The term papakama is then a person of bad disposition, the potentiality to behave incorrectly, wrongly, badly. So the physical action or object, which is the result of a specific motivation, never corresponds exactly with one's original intention, although it may come very near. And so the circumstances of the final action are infinite and often depend on other person's activities. And so there is always this collectivity, as HPB points out. We become identified with collective humanity because you cannot sound alone in a vacuum. We don't live in a vacuum. So this is always in relation, always in that incomplete relation. So it's not a matter of time, it's a matter of the immediacy of sounding one's own note, bringing it about. And so only certain broad features of the outcome can be considered controllable. As Krishna told Arjuna, you cannot appropriate to yourself the whole of any action, the completeness of any action. That is its fruit. And so, as Krishna told Arjuna, thy business is with the action only, never with its fruits. So let not the fruit of action be thy motive, nor be thou to inaction attached. Because there is always that sounding of the note. From such a point of view, and this is made quite explicit in the Bhagavad Gita, our personality, as anchored in the body, expresses itself in an outpouring of characteristic influences, some corresponding with our settled motivational tendencies, and others surfacing and still open to question, both kinds constituting our karma dharma. Both kinds are brought to us according to the demands of the situation. And so it is that all schools of Hindu thought focus on the transformation of human action, which is the law of sacrifice. It's the law in the Bhagavad Gita, in Sanskrit it's yajna, which is always this movement in which there is a making holy of every thought, feeling, and action. It focuses on that transformation then of human action from a mode that is rooted in avidya, ignorance, resulting in suffering, to a way of life which minimizes self-concern and compulsive attraction and repulsion and so on. And these root causes in Buddhism are listed as the causes of misery. This is in the very first stanza. The causes of misery are not, and the ways to bliss were not. It's very interesting because you can't have one without the other. So it's always present there. The nidanas, they're called, the chain of causation. And so in the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali, the central premise is that karma is associated then with this binding factor, the kleshas, as they're called in the Yoga Sutras. And every action leaves a residue. Every note sounded has overtones and undertones. And it goes on and on and on. So every word goes on and on to the farthest galaxies. The reverberation is there. And these form, of course, habit patterns that dictate the personality. These are really basic to what we talked about as the skandhas, the habit patterns, the patterns of sensation and name and form and thought patterns and idea patterns and so on. And so through the practice of yoga, the influence of action, the influence of this performing, which is karma, as dictated by the kleshas, the afflictions, are lessened to where the individual is internally peaceful, and the note being sounded is the note of compassion, which is sounding through us all the time. So one of the central developments in Indian thought was the increased emphasis put on the ability of the human effort to change the script of one's karmic constitution. This is the self-transformation that we'll talk about tomorrow. So when we think of karma, think of it as an action noun, as I say, to perform, to do. It's not the momentum of past actions so much as the power of our immediate act and our intentions. We can say that everything here is the present unique occasion is an ordered structure of possibilities, of opportunities. And at every moment, we are sounding and resounding. And we're doing it together, collectively. And we affect each other by the sounds we are making, by our thoughts, by our feelings, by our actions, constantly. So I hope that this has perhaps indicated what really can be. This is because creativity is part of karma. All is based in the mind. And so When we talk about lords of karma as though some great anthropomorphic beings are sitting out there, no. They are within us. They are agents who are consciousness here, within us. We are our own determiners. We are our own lords, chanting our own song. So there's much more that could be said about this, but ultimately the overriding law, the lawfulness, is compassion. Alaya's self, the very nature of the universe, is compassion.
The following program was produced by the Theosophical Society in America.
I thought this morning, which is our conclusion in this series, I would review a little bit the way we have come, the journey we have taken so far, make some comments on what I've called self-transformation. Look at that briefly. I began, if you may recall, with the idea that our lives are shaped by quite a number of factors. And I referred to my own experience. I began with an autobiographical reference that a number of years ago, when I was teaching high school in the Seattle Public Schools, I was asked to write my intellectual autobiography for a particular grant program. And I would like to suggest that in many ways this is a good exercise for everyone to trace the manner in which ideas have taken hold in your life and what the impact has been, and also how those ideas have changed, and the extent to which theosophical ideas have had an impact on our lives. Have they shaped our lives? Or have they been a kind of veneer, and we keep sort of refurbishing the veneer rather than looking under the veneer and seeing the deeper substratum of the ideas? Culture, our habit patterns, but to a very large extent, our particular Western language, the Indo-European language, has very definitely shaped a great deal of how we have approached theosophical ideas, because we speak in a linear language, because our language is very much composed of nouns, of things. We have objectified, and in that extent we hope things stay the same, because if I say that is a chair, presumably that's going to be still a chair and still the way it looks tomorrow and next year and so on. But has the chair really stayed the same? Is there not a continual flux? And we do this with people, and we have certain images, therefore, that we never change about people. Well, all of that, I think, was background. And then we looked at the great idea, which I had called unity-polarity, which I prefer to call chaos cosmos, the development of a whole system. What HPB called this movement from radiation to reflection to emanation. And in many ways, This is an analogy. HPB, of course, gives a great deal of attention to analogy. Analogy, she says, is the Ariadne's thread that will safely guide the student through all the mazes of existence. It's a wonderful statement that she makes. And so by analogy, that in us, which is the essential identity, is all the time, in a sense, radiating. And by that radiation, we find our reflection in everything. This whole universe is a turbulent mirror, to use the term out of chaos theory. The whole system is a turbulent mirror. So we too create our own turbulent mirrors and fail to see that what we are looking at is ourself in whatever we see. What you see is what you beget, is what I had put up here. And then we are constantly in the process of emanating. And that, however, that whole process, as we pointed out, is, of course, periodic, if you like. It's a dynamic interrelationship. There is a dynamism to the process, and that dynamism has its own rhythm, its own periodicity, its own kind of time. And so, and speaking of reincarnation, for example, which is going on constantly, we need to recognize that that is only one part of the picture, and that all the time we're in a position of exchange. We are constantly in exchange with ourselves, with others, with the universe about us. A dynamic that is creating our own being and recreating our own being in a kind of metempsychosis, in a kind of metanoia, as I suggested. These are ways in which, from beyond the sharing, the transmigration of the very life atoms, that we also are in this exchange with the whole universe, with each other, with ourselves. But it is an exchange, as I suggested yesterday, that is grounded in a great lawfulness. We generally term that lawfulness karma, but as I suggested yesterday, beyond karma, as it were, or enveloping karma, because karma is that action noun, which is simply action. That's all, performing, carrying out, making, creating. It's allied to creativity. To do is to create, and that continual creation is really grounded in a relationship from which the ultimate lawfulness is then compassion. As HPB puts it, compassion is no attribute, it is the law of laws. It is Alaya's self. That is to say, it is the very fabric of space, of the universe. So we are not existent in space, occultly speaking. We are cut from the same fabric, which is space. Akasha, Alaya, Mula Prakriti, Svabhavat. All of these terms are used in the secret doctrine. Wonderful terms, because each has a slightly different meaning, but we're all cut from that primary fabric, which is the fabric spread out, which is illuminated from within, which is conscious. So it is often called Chidakasha, that is to say, conscious in its own primary condition of which is consciousness, which is equally unconsciousness, if you like. So it is that Chidakasha. It is the very fabric. And the fabric is at all the time pulsing, all the time resonating, resounding. And so cut out of that, we are all of us then resounding, sounding our own being. And so out of these great ideas comes one of the most profound of all theosophical concepts. And it's pointed to in the third fundamental proposition of the secret doctrine, which I've already referred to. The pivotal doctrine of the esoteric philosophy, says HPB, admits no privileges or special gifts in the human being. And she, of course, uses the term man. I'd like to make a little plea that we don't fully discard the word man. I am as sensitive to gender languages as anyone, and I quite agree that we need to look at our language and see to what extent it has come to be a patriarchal language. But there are certain words, and man is among them, that we need to look at very carefully for its interior meaning. HPB speaks of the paradigm as the heavenly man. And I think to say heavenly human is not really what she's saying. This is what is known as the anthropic principle in science, that being in whom manas is coming awake, in which manas has been stimulated. And so, to use the term man, in certain contexts, I think has a deeper meaning than to translate it into human or a sentient being and so on. So there are no special gifts or privileges, she says, save those won by our own ego, that is to say, by our own center of identification, that I am I-ness in us. Wherever we place that I am I-ness, wherever we place it, we have to win through by our own center of consciousness through personal effort and merit. Personal effort. We have to really begin to look at where we place that in relation to the totality of our being. Now, HPB makes an interesting statement in talking about this basic pattern of the total I am I-ness, the total pattern of our identity, and has a direct bearing on what we can call the transformational processes. She points out there exists in nature a triple evolutionary scheme. We could say a triple emanational scheme, a kind of mirror images that continue. The whole universe as a turbulent mirror, which I think is a wonderful analogy there from chaos theory. And that mirror reflects and reflects and reflects. Have you ever been in a house of mirrors in some of these carnivals and so on? You know what I mean, that the mirror seems to go on and more mirrors. So there's a triple evolutionary scheme for the formation of the three periodical upadhis. Now, we spoke of this word upadhi, which is a wonderful word. It's a vessel, as it were. It's a vehicle which nourishes, which shapes. So when I talk about shaping our lives, what is the shape of your life, as it were, you see? Now, we have a physical shape, and that is the basic upadhi. This term, upadhi, indicates that there are these form-building potentialities at three different levels. And so she speaks of them as inextricably interwoven and interblended at every point. These, she says, are the monadic or spiritual. I'm not going to go into all about the monad, which would be interesting. The intellectual or monasic, and the physical, which includes, of course, the patterned body, which we often call the etheric, but the model body, of course. So when we consider our very nature, what we're dealing with are three form-building potentials in three different domains of our being. I don't like the word at three different levels because I resist the idea that we're a kind of layer cake with perhaps some chocolate icing on top, which we call the Atman, and so on. But rather, these are present simultaneously. They are as much here as anywhere. And so we're dealing, however, mainly, and HPB points this out, that it's the spiritual evolution of the inner immortal man that forms the fundamental tenet in the occult sciences. So what we're most concerned with is at this middle level, where alone we can affect both the physical and the spiritual or monadic. Our center of awareness is in the midpoint. In fact, Mahatma Maurya makes a wonderful statement that I think really helps us to understand this. The whole individuality, here is the I-centered consciousness, the I am I, ahamkara if you like, is centered in the three middle or third, fourth, and fifth principles. So we do need to be aware of what are these principles. Now, according to the Mahatma, having defined what happens to the principles after death, gives us a very interesting statement with regard to that, so that the third principle is prana in the original classification. HPB, in her esoteric writings, pointed out that there are three forces in the universe, three energies fundamentally, which are non-interchangeable, it is said, for our particular system. They are known as Fohat, Prana, and Kundalini. Then HPB makes a wonderful statement. She says all three are sons of Fohat. So I call it Fohat Jr., which is that which creates the turbulent mirror, if you like. It is the dynamism of the relationship. The creative principle, really, is, in one sense, that original dynamism. Prana then sustains, just as breath. If you keep breathing, it sustains life, and it's present throughout. And, of course, Kundalini is that which is transformative, is the whole transformative principle. But in her esoteric writings, she says that since prana is throughout the whole system, she substitutes or gives us a further stage, which she calls the auric envelope or the auric egg. Very interesting, because it is this kind of envelope, if you like, this kind of all-embracing covering, which is composed of all of the karmic seeds, the seeds of the skandhas, which we've already mentioned, and which therefore has to be cleansed. So from the point of view of the Mahatma, the third, fourth, and fifth principle, prana, kama, K-A-M-A, which is, of course, the desire nature, the passional nature, and the fifth principle, manas. And then the Mahatma continues, during earthly life, it is all in the fourth, which is very interesting. The center of energy, volition, will. So here in the kamic, in the passional nature, which is a reflection of compassion, we'll see that in a moment, but the passional nature, which needs to be purified, which is often our stumbling block, isn't it? It's often that which is the biggest obstruction for us. I always think of Mr. Krishnamurti, and I heard him say so very often, you lack passion. That is to say, we lack this interior commitment, and it's through karma, a reflection then of compassion. It's through karma, suggests the Mahatma and HPB, of course, that our real commitment, the whole energy of our being at this stage of our evolution is focused. We need passion. I think really, if more of our members had that kind of passion for Theosophy, what a dynamic society. This is where the dynamism lies. We have a passion for these ideas, and so they change our lives, they shape our lives, they completely transform our lives. So during earthly life, it is all in the fourth, the center of energy, volition, will. And then he speaks of the difference between personality and individuality. The former, personality, hardly survives, but the latter, that is the individuality, to run successfully its sevenfold downward and upward course, has to assimilate to itself the eternal life power residing but in the seventh. Now that's Fohat. That's the eternal life power. That is the dynamism of exchange, of sacrifice. This is what Krishna tells Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, that it's the very dynamism that brings into manifestation the whole created system. With one fragment of myself, I create, I bring it forth out of my being. This is the dynamism. And so the life power residing but in the seventh, in Atman, is the dynamism of this primordial sacrifice. And in myth after myth after myth, the whole creative process is presented as the sacrifice of a god, the dismemberment of a god. One gets it in the Nordic mythology. One gets it in so many myths. It's the dismemberment of the god. And that dismemberment is the result of this primordial energy of Fohat. And then blend the three. And here is the transformation that is expected of us. The fourth, fifth, and seventh. Notice that. To blend these, the fourth, fifth, and seventh, kama, manas, which is now our focus. And this is where the transformation, the metempsychosis, is to take place. The cleansing of the thinking principle. So blend the three, fourth, fifth, and seventh, into one. Buddhi, the sixth, which is to be awake. Maurya goes on to say, those who succeed in doing so become Buddhas, Dhyan Chohans, etc. Now this is the goal for our human life wave. And so the letter goes on to say, the chief object of our struggles, the chief object of our struggles and initiations is to achieve this union while yet on this earth, in physical incarnation. It is here, now, we undertake this tremendous transformation. Isn't that a marvelous statement? The chief object of our struggles. He also points out that the Mahatma K.H. was on his way to achieving this and so on. But the chief object of our struggles and initiations is to achieve this union, that is to say, to blend the fourth, fifth, and seventh principles, the power in them, the dynamism in them, into one, the sixth, because this is a universe of compassion. This is the law of laws. Into clear seeing, if you like, into knowing, fully knowing. As HPB said, to change the whole atomic structure, starting upon the long journey immaculate, descending more and more into sinful matter, and having connected himself with every atom in manifested space. This is that interrelationship, that dynamic coming into relationship with every unit in manifested space, the pilgrim, that's us, the monad, having struggled through and suffered in every form of life and being, is only at the bottom of the valley of matter, and half through his cycle, when he has identified himself with collective humanity, it is the martyrdom of self-conscious existence. This is the work that we are to undertake. All of these powers are within us. And so when HPB speaks of this triple evolutionary scheme, she focuses in, of course, on manas. This is where the center is. And it moves out from there. And that's why Theosophy is for those who can think, not for the mentally lazy, as she said. And it's why, as she said, the study of the secret doctrine is intended to change the little brain waves, to restructure the very brain, she pointed out to her students, you know, to bring about a totally new structure. Let me then point out the goal then, as it were. It's very simply said in the Bhagavad Gita in chapter 5, verse 23. And it's a wonderful statement. He who is able to endure here on earth, that is in physical incarnation, he who is able to endure here on earth ere he be liberated from the body, the force born from desire and passion, he is a happy man. This is true happiness. This is the delight. This is the lila, the play. The universe is the playground. This is the play. And we all have our roles. We all have our work to do. We all have our uniqueness, but blended together in this wonderful drama that is being played out. He who is able to endure here on earth, now, yes, to bear it, to endure it, to take it on ourselves. Each one of us, the pain, the suffering, but the joyousness of the collective humanity, as she said. Identify ourselves with all sentient beings. The force, this power, born of desire and passion. He is a happy man. Isn't that wonderful? This is the transformation. And it awaits every single one of us. This is the idea that can really reshape our lives. Totally, wholly, fully, completely reshape our lives so that we should never be the same again. This is the possibility that is held out. This idea, I think, should be so overwhelming that everything within us responds to that universal call. What Jeffrey Hudson called the call from the heights. that call that is resounding through the whole universe. And we can respond to it, move in our own way. But it's exciting. It's the most exciting adventure anyone could ever engage in.